There are moments in history when the absence of sound is more thunderous than any proclamation. Moments when the stillness that follows a question shakes the world more than the answer ever could. This is one of those moments. The Vatican, known for centuries as a beacon of spiritual direction and unwavering communication, now finds itself cloaked in a silence so complete that it has begun to echo around the globe. The very heart of the Catholic Church, a sovereign city that speaks with authority to more than 1 billion faithful across continents, has fallen unnervingly quiet. And that silence surrounds one man, the figure at the helm of the Holy See, Pope Francis. Where once there were papal audiences, homilies broadcast live, tweets sent with pastoral wisdom, now there is a vacuum, a gaping absence of presence. There is no voice, no statement, no footage. Only questions. The kind of questions that linger long in the minds of the faithful and the skeptical alike. Has the world's most visible spiritual leader truly vanished without the world being told? It began subtly, imperceptibly. Days passed, then weeks. What was once assumed to be a scheduling lull started to stretch, and as it stretched, it strained the edges of global curiosity. Soon, that curiosity fermented into speculation. And speculation, without the weight of official denial or confirmation, calcified into a global unease. Why would the Vatican, with all its press machinery, all its ceremonial rigor, and all its theological gravitas, allow such a void to exist? Some say the answer is in their traditions. The Church has always guarded information like sacred relics, deliberate, measured, and often shrouded in ritual. Yet this silence feels different. It's not the solemn hush of reverence, nor the careful pause of diplomacy. It is the uncanny, creeping silence of something withheld, something not yet meant to be seen. When world leaders fall ill or pass, the world is informed within hours. Nations lower flags. Headlines ignite. Statements pour in from every corner of the earth. But when whispers emerged that Pope Francis may no longer be alive, there was none of that. There were no black cassocks, no tolling bells, no visible mourning. Just a peculiar stillness from the Holy See. And with it, a chilling question. What does it mean when the institution known for certainty chooses not to speak? The mainstream press, typically relentless in its pursuit of answers, seemed hesitant this time. They treaded softly, tiptoeing around vague reports, uncertain sources, and inconsistencies in timeline. Instead of the usual flood of investigative fervor, there was only cautious language, suggestive phrasing, conditional verbs. Why was the global media ever so eager for a scoop, reluctant to chase this one? This isn't the first time in history that the Vatican has exercised control over what is seen and what is known. Its walls, both literal and metaphorical, have hidden secrets for centuries. But never has such a profound and public mystery, one with such far-reaching spiritual and political implications, been met with such a resolute refusal to acknowledge the question. And the question, now whispered in every corner of the digital world, has grown too loud to ignore. If Pope Francis is truly gone, why has the Vatican not said a word? Millions look to Rome for guidance, for reassurance, for truth. And yet, they are met with doors that do not open and mouths that do not move. No statement, no denial, no confirmation. Nothing. Not even the symbolic language the Church has often used to signal transition. No black smoke, no funeral preparations, no televised rites. Only silence. Psalm 94 verse 11 reminds us that the Lord knows the thoughts of man, that they are but a breath. In times like these, that breath feels held, anxiously, collectively. Held across parishes and cathedrals, across the screens of believers who wait, eyes scanning for a glimpse, a phrase, a sign. But the Vatican says nothing. The silence is no longer just an absence of sound. It is now a presence in itself. It shapes perception. It feeds suspicion. It invites analysis. And in doing so, it begins to eclipse the man it surrounds. Because in an age of relentless connectivity, silence this calculated is not born of ignorance, it is born of intent. As we sit at the edge of uncertainty, we must ask, is the Vatican protecting something, concealing something, or perhaps preparing something? The silence in all its gravity has become the story. And if the truth is indeed being held behind those high, holy walls, then one must wonder, what truth could be so great, so devastating, or so dangerous that even the Vatican dares not speak it aloud? This is not just about the absence of a pope. It is about the absence of the expected, the unnatural stillness where there should be movement, the unanswered question where there should be certainty, and the piercing realization that something has changed, something profound, and perhaps irreversible. And so the world listens, not to what is being said, but to what is not. Because in that silence, a mystery grows. And with each passing day, the silence speaks louder. It began not with a proclamation, but with a whisper. In the digital age, the flow of information travels at a speed beyond comprehension. News breaks not from podiums, but from screens. And yet, in the case of Pope Francis' rumored death, the world didn't witness a single clarifying headline from Rome. Instead, it watched as silence gave way to confusion. What should have been a global event, marked with official communiques and ceremonial mourning, came to life as a ghost story, whispered in pixels and hashtags. The first trace of the rumor didn't originate from a press briefing or an emergency Vatican address. It emerged quietly in obscure forums and fringe news sources. The date is still debated. Some point to a Tuesday, others to a late Friday evening. But the moment the rumor surfaced, it moved like smoke. Hard to see at first, then impossible to ignore. Someone claimed that the Pope had passed. No citation, no photo, just a statement. The Holy Father is no longer with us. That was all. Major networks did not pick it up. Instead, they carried on with routine coverage, regional elections, international disputes, economic updates. The death of the Supreme Pontiff, leader of the Roman Catholic Church, should have suspended the world. It should have set in motion a deeply coordinated protocol. Yet, what followed was a strange collective hesitation. Newsrooms around the globe began receiving tips, but chose caution. Internally, editorial boards discussed whether or not to investigate. Several journalists hinted at and verified developments without naming the source. Some reporters tweeted veiled suggestions, asking followers if they had seen recent appearances of the Pope. Yet no outlet dared say the words outright. There were no obituaries prepared, no retrospectives aired, no Vatican reporter placed on urgent assignment. Just an eerie, deliberate pause. And it wasn't just the media that hesitated. The Vatican itself, normally swift to refute falsehoods, said nothing. In previous years, even minor health scares involving the Pope were swiftly addressed. But now, no bulletin, no press conference. The Vatican news portal remained unchanged. The apostolic palace might as well have been a locked castle in a fable. Lights on, windows curtained, no movement within. In this void, the world began to search for its own answers. Social media, often dismissed as noisy or unreliable, turned into the only theater where the drama played out. On TikTok, users analyzed the Pope's last video, frame by frame. On Twitter, threads appeared comparing his last public address to older footage, noting subtle differences in facial expressions and tone. On Reddit, timelines were built, mapping the final verified sighting of Pope Francis and charting everything that followed or failed to follow. Contradictions began to emerge. An anonymous source, allegedly a Vatican staffer, claimed that Pope Francis had been under medical supervision for weeks and had not been seen in person by many of his own aides. Another account, traced back to a journalist in Argentina, insisted that internal preparations for a papal funeral were already underway. These claims were neither confirmed nor denied. They simply hung in the air, feeding a growing unease. Even stranger were the photos and videos that did surface. One video, supposedly of the Pope delivering a brief blessing, sparked more questions than answers. The lighting was odd, the audio delayed. The Pope didn't speak spontaneously, didn't acknowledge the camera as he usually would. Instead, he delivered a few sentences, pre-recorded, perhaps then disappeared. The Vatican said nothing about when or where the video had been filmed. The silence created a vacuum. And as the old saying goes, nature abhors a vacuum. In this case, so did the internet. Hashtags like hashtag "Where is the Pope?" and hashtag "Vatican Silence" began trending globally. Conspiracy channels on YouTube amassed millions of views by rehashing the same clips and crafting theories. Was there a cover-up? Had the Pope fallen ill and died without warning? Or was he removed, silenced for reasons darker than illness or age? But the strangest aspect of all was the muted global reaction. There were no emergency meetings at the United Nations, no shift in Catholic dioceses around the world, no special masses, no papal nuncios issuing clarifications to concerned governments. It was as though the Church, and the world with it, was playing a silent waiting game, a strange suspension of breath. And perhaps most chilling of all were the contradictions from within the Vatican itself. One spokesperson, reached by a journalist for comment, responded vaguely, "The Holy Father is in prayer." Another, days later, told a different outlet, "He continues to guide us spiritually." Neither statement confirmed his location or health. Both could be interpreted symbolically, spiritually, posthumously, and yet still no confirmation came, nor did a denial. By now, the world had frozen in place, not because it had been told to, but because it didn't know what to believe. The Pope, perhaps the single most recognizable religious figure alive, had seemingly vanished. And not a single institution, not one government, not one news agency, was willing to say definitively what had happened. Psalm 82 verse 5 reads, "They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness." And in that darkness, millions walked, uncertain whether they were witnessing history or illusion. Because while the Vatican remained unshaken on the outside, within the global consciousness, something had already shifted. A line had been crossed, not by statement, but by silence. And in that moment, a realization dawned. When no one tells you the truth, even the smallest rumor becomes sacred. It becomes prophecy. It becomes fuel for something far greater than simple doubt. The story of Pope Francis' supposed death did not begin with truth. It began with silence. But silence, when prolonged, becomes its own form of speech, its own kind of announcement. And as the world froze, confused, suspended, disoriented, it was that silence which spoke most clearly of all. To understand the silence, one must understand the machine behind it. The Vatican is often perceived as a monolithic figurehead, with the Pope at its center, illuminated by divine guidance and clothed in white robes. But the true anatomy of its governance reveals something far more intricate, a labyrinth of ecclesiastical offices, ancient protocols, and political forces that rarely see the light of day. The Pope, while visible, is only one piece on the grand board. And in moments of uncertainty, especially those shrouded in secrecy, other pieces move more freely. When the Pope is absent, or even presumed absent, attention naturally turns toward the Camerlengo, the Chamberlain of the Holy Roman Church. In the event of a papal death, it is the Camerlengo who assumes a role of immense authority, not spiritual, but administrative. He oversees the Vatican's operations during the interregnum, the period between two papacies. He verifies the Pope's death, formally announces it to the public, and initiates the ancient rituals that guide the Church through mourning and succession. Yet, in this case, no such announcement was made. No ceremonial verification. No sealing of the papal apartments. No formal gathering of cardinals. If the Camerlengo knows the truth, he has not shared it. If he has spoken, his words have been confined to the corridors of power, not to the ears of the people. Why? Silence in this context is not passive. It is an instrument, a tool, a shield, and potentially a weapon. Then comes the College of Cardinals, a body of men often overlooked by the faithful, yet critically central to Vatican governance. These are the Pope's electors, advisors, and potential successors. They do not function as a democratic parliament, but as a sacred council shaped by decades of alliances, rivalries, and theological tensions. Their decisions are made behind closed doors, often in Latin, often in secrecy. In the absence of the Pope, the college should have convened. Rumors suggest that informal gatherings did take place, but again, no official conclave, no white smoke, no transparent process. Several cardinals were seen arriving in Rome quietly, without public statements, their movements unreported by state or church media. Flights tracked, gates entered, curtains drawn. The question arises, why would the college assemble without a declared vacancy? And if there is no conclave, then who is steering the church? That responsibility in practice often falls to the Roman Curia, a complex bureaucratic network that administers the Vatican's daily affairs. Comprised of congregations, pontifical councils, tribunals, and secretariats, the Curia is as much a governmental body as it is a religious one. It is the machinery that continues to function even when the figurehead goes silent. It drafts policies, communicates with dioceses around the world, manages Vatican diplomacy, and controls much of the internal narrative. Within the Curia, power is diffuse, but potent. Some offices are more symbolic, others command vast influence, especially over finances, doctrine, and global communications. The prefect for the Congregation of Bishops, the Secretary of State, the prefect for the doctrine of the faith. These are names few outside the Vatican know, yet their signatures can shift ecclesiastical law and redirect millions. When a pope is active, these figures operate under his mandate. When he is absent or weakened, their roles can expand into a void. And should there be uncertainty, whether due to illness, death, or something less explainable, that vacuum becomes fertile ground for consolidation. Psalm 12 verse 2 warns, "Everyone utters lies to his neighbor. With flattering lips and a double heart they speak, and in the court of the Vatican, flattery and duplicity have long walked hand in hand." There is speculation that within the current silence, factions have begun to maneuver. Some speak of a conservative bloc, opposed to the more progressive elements Pope Francis represented. Others mention financial motives, hidden alliances with powerful global interests. These tensions are not new, but what is new and disturbing is the freedom with which they now seem to operate, unchallenged by the Pope's voice. A vacuum of leadership can become a breeding ground for ambition. Without clarity, each faction may claim authority in its own way, presenting itself as the legitimate heir to papal direction. The risk is not merely confusion, it is fracture. A church pulled quietly into ideological war, even as the faithful remain unaware. This raises a critical possibility that the Vatican's silence is not just about hiding a death, but about managing a transition too fragile or too dangerous to reveal. In the absence of light, those who dwell in shadow grow bolder. The lack of a definitive voice allows for internal narratives to take root, each vying for control over doctrine, tradition, and the direction of the Church's future. If there is infighting, it is not loud. It is strategic, controlled, kept behind marble walls and spoken in whispers. This is why no single statement has emerged, because to speak might reveal the fracture. To confirm the Pope's absence might unleash forces that are not yet ready or willing to be seen. Power in the Vatican is not just spiritual, it is political, historical, inherited and protected by centuries of structure. And in that structure, silence can serve more purposes than truth ever could. As we peer through the keyhole of this grand ecclesiastical fortress, we must ask, if the Pope is no longer at the helm, who is steering the ship? And are they guiding it toward light or into deeper shadows? The Catholic Church does not merely mourn its leaders, it venerates them with precision. When a Pope dies, the Vatican does not respond with improvisation. It moves with solemn choreography, dictated not by preference, but by centuries of law, tradition, and divine symbolism. This ancient process is encapsulated in the Ordo Exequiarum Romani Pontificis, the formal liturgical and administrative manual that governs every detail from the moment of death to the conclave that elects a successor. And yet, none of it has happened. There has been no declaration from the Camerlengo, who under this protocol must verify the Pope's death by calling his name 3 times and ceremonially striking his forehead with a silver hammer. There has been no announcement to the public, no official notice posted at the gates of St. Peter's Basilica. Not a single element of the sacred pageantry has been observed, not even a hint. What makes this silence more unsettling is that these rituals are not optional. They are codified, immutable, designed not only to honor the departed, but to reassure the global Church that all is proceeding as it should. When these signs are absent, something deeper is at work. Let us consider what is typically expected. Upon the verified death of a pope, his fisherman's ring, a symbol of papal authority, is removed and ceremonially destroyed. His private papal seals are broken to prevent forgeries. The Vatican city flag is flown at half-staff. Bells are tolled, and black drapery is placed upon the apostolic palace. These are public signals meant not only for the clergy, but for the world. Their absence is not simply an oversight. It is a rupture in the order. The funeral rites, too, follow a deeply symbolic structure. A 9-day period of mourning known as the Novem Dies takes place, during which masses are held daily. The Pope's body is displayed for veneration in St. Peter's Basilica. Diplomats, cardinals, clergy, and lay faithful attend in vast numbers. Cameras capture the grandeur, and the world participates in the Church's grief. Yet now, St. Peter's Square remains conspicuously unchanged. No stages erected, no seating arranged, no sounds of preparation, no signs of mourning. It is as if the Church waits for nothing. Equally conspicuous is the absence of the sede vacanti symbol, the coat of arms used during the interregnum, which depicts the empty papal throne beneath the crossed keys of St. Peter. This image is traditionally unveiled to the world immediately after a pope's death. Instead, the current papal coat of arms remains undisturbed, quietly adorning Vatican documents and official platforms, even as speculation swells. Psalm 74 verse 9 reads, "We do not see our signs." There is no longer any prophet, and there is none among us who knows how long. This line, written in a time of despair, resonates deeply now. For those who watch the Vatican carefully, journalists, theologians, insiders, these signs are not minor omissions. They are signals in their own right, messages encoded in absence. There is also the matter of black smoke, traditionally seen rising from the Sistine Chapel chimney, to indicate that no new pope has been elected during a conclave. Its companion, white smoke, signals the opposite, that a new pope has been chosen. But in either case, smoke means motion. It means action. There has been no smoke, no sign that the College of Cardinals has even convened for a conclave. If Pope Francis has indeed passed, this would mark a historic break with one of the most sacred and visible customs of the Church. Perhaps even more quietly significant are the inconsistencies in papal communications. On official Vatican channels, recent messages attributed to Pope Francis have continued to appear, but their format has changed. Once full of spontaneous commentary and pastoral warmth, they now read like curated doctrine, cold, brief, mechanical. There are no new photographs, no video clips, no public appearances to accompany these words. For those who understand the Vatican's inner workings, this shift is deafening. A papal message without a visible pope is like incense without fire. It carries a scent, but no source. A high-ranking official, speaking under condition of anonymity, remarked in a rare off-the-record interview, "You know something is wrong not by what is said, but by what is not done, and in this case, so many things have not been done. The bells of St. Peter's Basilica have not tolled. The black vestments have not been worn. The world's bishops have not been summoned. These are not errors. They are intentional omissions." It raises a sobering possibility that the traditional protocols are being deliberately bypassed. But why? Some suggest that the delay is out of caution to ensure a smooth transition amid internal tension. Others believe it is to conceal a deeper struggle, perhaps a contested succession or a factional dispute within the College of Cardinals. And a growing number whisper that there is no protocol because there has been no official death, at least not one the Vatican is ready to declare. This ambiguity creates a disturbing tension. Without rituals, the Church cannot publicly grieve. Without closure, the faithful are left in limbo. The very structure that has guided Catholicism for 2 millennia seems to be paralyzed, suspended between secrecy and tradition. And in that suspension, shadows grow. Because in the Vatican, symbols matter. Protocols are not empty gestures. They are sacred codes written into the bones of the institution. And when those codes are disrupted, something extraordinary is always at play, something not meant to be seen, or at least not yet. Every leader casts a shadow. For Pope Francis, that shadow has always been distinctly visible, cast across balconies, broadcast through homilies, heard in the humble cadence of his voice. From the moment of his election, he made it a point to be seen and heard. He greeted crowds not from a throne, but on foot. He spoke not in lofty declarations, but in language that reached the heart. His presence, both physical and digital, was constant. Until it wasn't. The first signs were barely noticeable. A missed address here, a delayed statement there. At first, they were attributed to age or fatigue. After all, Pope Francis had long battled health issues. His knee troubles were public. He had undergone surgery. The Vatican issued periodic updates, always minimizing concerns. And most of the world accepted these explanations. But the patterns tell a different story. In the months leading up to the alleged death, his public schedule grew increasingly sparse. Normally filled with diplomatic audiences, pastoral visits, and Wednesday general audiences, the papal calendar began to exhibit odd gaps. Events were cancelled with little explanation. Public addresses were shortened, often replaced with generic messages read by other Vatican officials. Each absence was small on its own, but collectively they formed a trail. A timeline emerges. In mid-autumn, observers noticed the first significant shift. An expected video message for a major international interfaith summit was never released. The Pope had been scheduled to speak on themes of peace and climate responsibility, topics he had championed for years. Instead, the Vatican released a brief written statement, unsigned, attributed vaguely to the Holy See soon after. Planned visits to South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo were postponed indefinitely. The reason, according to official statements, was logistical concerns, yet no one in the diplomatic community could recall a papal visit being shelved so abruptly, with so little detail. And then came the Christmas Mass. Traditionally, the midnight Mass at St. Peter's Basilica is a defining moment. The Pope stands before thousands, his voice echoing through marble and candlelight. But this time, a pre-recorded video was aired. Not live. No crowds. No broadcast of the Pope entering or exiting. And although the Vatican insisted the Pope had celebrated the Mass in private, no photos were shared. No eyewitnesses stepped forward. Only silence followed. By January, even the most devoted followers began to question the footage. One video in particular, meant to show the Pope blessing a group of children, sparked immediate skepticism. The lighting was unnatural. The Pope's movements were stiff. His lips moved, but the audio was curiously delayed. Several experts in digital forensics publicly questioned whether the clip had been altered, or even if it was genuine at all. A still image released around the same time drew similar scrutiny. The Pope seated near a window, wore vestments that appeared incongruent with the season. Behind him, the Roman skyline showed signs of digital manipulation. The Vatican provided no context, no date, no photographer's name. Just a caption, "In prayer for peace." It did not feel like presence. It felt like memory. Psalm 55 verse 3 says, "Because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they bring down trouble upon me, and in anger they bear a grudge against me in moments of truth's absence. Even a voice that once guided becomes surrounded by suspicion." The Pope's voice, which once called out injustice with boldness, grew softer. Then it grew distant. Then it vanished altogether. The Apostolic Palace, normally a beacon of continuity, began operating as a fortress. Interviews were declined. Journalists were told that no health bulletins would be issued. Internal Vatican photographers, once prolific, ceased publishing new material. And still, the Vatican's official communication office maintained its script. The Holy Father is in prayer, or he continues his spiritual service, but the key question is, when was Pope Francis last truly seen? Not in still frames, not in edited video, but alive, spontaneous, and in motion. The answer is more elusive than it should be. Vatican observers place that moment somewhere between late November and early December. Since then, all appearances have been tightly controlled, mediated through official channels, lacking the organic unpredictability of live events. In normal times, the absence of a pope's public face would ignite immediate concern. But here, the disappearance was so gradual, so carefully masked with occasional glimpses, that it escaped wide notice until the silence could no longer be explained. Some Vatican watchers have suggested that pre-recorded messages may have been banked weeks in advance, designed to maintain the illusion of activity. Others speculate that a health crisis may have rendered the Pope incapable of speaking, prompting the release of statements on his behalf, while preparations were made behind the scenes. But whatever the explanation, the effect is the same: The Pope, once so present, so vocal, has gone quiet. And not just in word, but in image, in motion, in spontaneity. The leader of the Catholic Church, once affectionately called the People's Pope, now exists only in fragments, clips without context, words without a voice, appearances without witnesses. The silence around his death begins not with an announcement, but with the careful erosion of his presence, until there is nothing left to question, only the absence itself. For a church defined by ceremony, the absence of ritual is not a mistake, it is a message. The passing of a pope is supposed to be unmistakable. It begins with solemn rites, climaxes in a global gathering of cardinals, and ends with white smoke billowing into the Roman sky. But now, the rituals are missing. The sky remains silent, and still the Church continues to move. Which raises a dangerous and extraordinary question. Has the transition already happened? In the shadows of the Apostolic Palace, beyond the reach of journalists and the sight of the world, there are signs that something is shifting. Subtle signs, seen only by those who know where to look. A change in the tone of statements released by the Vatican Secretariat of State. A reshuffling of appointments and delegations. Bishops receiving unexpected directives. Cardinals arriving in Rome without explanation, their presence unacknowledged by public schedules. What if a conclave has already taken place, but not in the Sistine Chapel? Not under the watchful eye of television cameras, but behind sealed doors, in whispered conversations in private chapels far from public view. This is not entirely unprecedented. There are historical instances where papal transitions were marred by secrecy, political manipulation, and even violence. The Church, for all its grandeur, is not immune to the ambitions of men. And in times of crisis, especially in moments when the sitting pope is incapacitated or contested, the machinery of succession does not always wait for official death. It adapts. It moves. Quietly. Recent satellite imagery showed increased activity around the Domus Sancti Marthi, the Vatican residence where cardinals stay during conclaves. Security was visibly heightened. Deliveries increased. The entrances, normally accessible to vetted press during conclave preparations, were barricaded. Inside sources have whispered of a closed-door meeting attended by a core group of cardinal electors. No documentation, no announcement. The Vatican refused to comment. Psalm 64 verse 5 offers a chilling insight. They hold fast to their evil purpose. They talk of laying snares secretly, thinking, who can see them? If there is a new pope, or at least a consensus around one, then the silence may not be a pause. It may be a veil drawn deliberately to obscure a coronation, unlike any in modern memory. Evidence also points to diplomatic irregularities. In early March, several Vatican ambassadors known as apostolic nuncios were suddenly recalled to Rome without public explanation. These nuncios are not ceremonial figures. They are the Pope's eyes and ears across the globe, managing sensitive ecclesiastical and geopolitical relationships. Their rapid and quiet return to the Holy See suggests something urgent, something that required alignment at the highest level. Furthermore, 3 heads of state, whose names remain unconfirmed but were verified through flight logs and embassy communications, held private, unscheduled audiences in the Vatican during this period. The meetings were not covered by Vatican media. No press statements followed. And yet, these same leaders made vague references upon returning to their respective countries, referring to a reaffirmed commitment to spiritual continuity and discussions about moral direction in times of global instability. What could prompt such discreet visits? And more critically, who were they meeting? It is this question that cuts to the heart of the mystery. If Pope Francis is no longer in power, and no new pope has been declared, who is speaking for the Church? who receives ambassadors, grants blessings, signs documents. The canonical structure of the Vatican does not permit such ambiguity unless that structure is being held in suspension for reasons not yet revealed. And there's more. A source embedded in the Vatican Archives Division reported unusual activity in the Office of Apostolic Letters. This office, responsible for recording and publishing papal decrees, has reportedly logged several documents in recent weeks, none of which have been made public. Their signatures are sealed, their content unknown. It is highly irregular. When asked for clarification, Vatican officials responded only, "All decisions are made in accordance with the will of the Holy Father." But which Holy Father? These signs, taken individually, might suggest nothing. A canceled trip, a quiet period, a private meeting. But together, they form a pattern, a movement that hints not at chaos, but at carefully orchestrated continuity, one that moves without announcement, one that denies the world a glimpse of its leader, not because there isn't one, but because there is, just not the one we think. Could a silent coronation be unfolding within the marble halls of the Vatican? Could the Church already be operating under new spiritual leadership while the faithful remain unaware? If so, it would be a transition unlike any other, one that bypasses tradition in favor of control, one that shields itself not with incense or choirs, but with the impenetrable shield of non-disclosure. Power abhors a vacuum, and in the absence of the Pope's voice, someone is filling the silence. The Church has not stopped functioning. Orders continue. Missives go out. Policy decisions are made. Somewhere within those walls, a hand is turning the wheel, but whose hand? In times of crisis, when facts fall silent and institutions close their gates, people turn to prophecy. They search the ancient scrolls and whispered warnings of saints, hoping to find in the riddles of the past a map to make sense of the present. For the Catholic Church, no prophecy carries more weight or more fear than the one attributed to Saint Malachy, the 12th century Irish archbishop whose chilling vision of future popes has haunted the faithful for centuries. According to legend, while visiting Rome in 1139, Malachy fell into a deep trance and received a vision of all future pontiffs from his time until the end of the Church age. He wrote 112 cryptic Latin mottos, each describing a future pope. These phrases, known collectively as the prophecy of the popes, were hidden in the Vatican's secret archives and only resurfaced publicly in 1595. By then, the mottos appeared to align startlingly well with the papal lineages that had passed. The final motto is the most terrifying: in persecution extrema es. R.E. sedebit Petrus Romanus. In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will feed his flock amid many tribulations, after which the seven-hilled city will be destroyed and the dreadful judge will judge the people. Many believe Pope Francis is this Peter the Roman, not because of his given name, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, but because of his roots. He is the son of Italian immigrants to Argentina. He is a pope who chose the name Francis, yet remains tied to Rome not just by office, but by lineage. A Roman by descent, a shepherd amid division, and above all, a leader who emerged at a moment when the Church was in turmoil, doctrinally, politically, and morally. If this prophecy is true, it does not merely suggest the death of a pope. It foretells the collapse of Rome itself, the judgment of the Church, and the culmination of all things as known. It casts Pope Francis not only as a figure of transition, but as a signal and omen. And now, in the suffocating silence of the Vatican, some wonder, has the final moment begun? Several mystics and saints throughout Church history have echoed similar warnings. Saint John Bosco, in the 19th century, had a vision of a future pope navigating the church through stormy waters, eventually guiding it between two columns, one representing the Eucharist, the other the Virgin Mary. His vision ended with a sudden calm, but only after catastrophe and betrayal. Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, a 19th century German mystic, spoke of seeing a dark church and a great pope lying prostrate in silence, surrounded by traitors. She described shadowy forces within the Vatican itself conspiring to undo the faith from the inside, forces that worked silently, efficiently, and with uncanny patience. Her visions were dismissed by some as overly symbolic, until now, when symbolism seems to have become reality. Then there are the children of Fatima, who in 1917 received what is now called the Third Secret, a message that spoke of a bishop in white being killed, a city in ruins, and a church under attack. While the Vatican has claimed this prophecy was fulfilled with the 1981 assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II, many theologians argue that only part of the message was revealed, that the true contents remain hidden because they speak of internal collapse, of apostasy, silence, and betrayal. Psalm 60 verse 3 reads, "You have made your people see hard things. You have given us wine to drink that made us stagger, and stagger we do, beneath the weight of these old words." Because they seem to speak to now, to a pope unseen, a Vatican unmoved, and a world unmoored. What if the prophecies are not merely warnings, but blueprints? The silence that now shrouds the Vatican does not echo in a vacuum. It resonates against centuries of prediction, warnings that were dismissed, spiritual insights filed away under folklore, until now, when their outlines begin to match the headlines we cannot find. And what if the silence itself is a sign foretold? A final pause before judgment, a breath before fire. Even the behavior of those closest to the papal office seems to match prophetic patterns. Cardinals divided, bishops confused, lay people bewildered, a church uncertain whether it is led or leaderless, a Rome still standing, but no longer speaking. Those who study eschatology, end times theology, point out that prophecy often unfolds not as spectacle, but as whisper, not in thunder, but in echo. And the most alarming part of the current moment is not what we see, but what we do not. The Pope is not seen. His death is not declared. His voice has not returned. Yet the mechanisms of the Church continue without him. This is the pattern of prophecy: tribulation before revelation, silence before judgment. If Pope Francis is Peter the Roman, then his absence may not just be a mystery, it may be fulfillment. If he is gone, and the Vatican will not say it, then the prophecy becomes more than warning. It becomes indictment against those who hid it, against those who benefit from it, against those who know the truth but refuse to speak. And if Rome falls, not in fire, but in trust, then the prophecy will have come to pass in the most devastating way, not through violence, but through the slow death of certainty. In the age of instant communication, a silence of this magnitude is not just an absence, it is a presence that reshapes everything it touches. The Vatican's refusal to confirm or deny the status of Pope Francis has not occurred in isolation. It has created a vacuum in a global system that is delicately interwoven with religious influence, political strategy, and economic stability. The ripple effects of this silence, though unspoken in the public square, are already being felt in the corridors of power. The papacy is not merely a spiritual role, it is a geopolitical office. The Pope is both head of the Catholic Church and sovereign of the Vatican city-state, a status that allows the Holy See to engage in formal diplomatic relations with over 180 nations. The Vatican is not just a religious center. It is a political entity with its own ambassadors, treaties, and influence in international law. When its leader disappears from public life with no explanation, the world does not simply watch, it recalibrates. First, there is the religious realignment quietly unfolding behind closed doors. Catholic majority nations, especially in Latin America, Africa, and parts of Asia, depend on signals from Rome to guide internal church matters and societal values. The absence of papal guidance is leaving regional bishops without direction. In Brazil, bishops have postponed a planned synodal assembly, citing the unclear status of higher leadership. In the Philippines, a sudden increase in local clerical autonomy has been observed, with archdioceses making decisions that would traditionally await Rome's input. The unity of global Catholicism, carefully maintained through centuries of centralized authority, is beginning to fray. Then there is the diplomatic ambiguity. The Holy See frequently serves as a neutral broker in international negotiations, from Middle Eastern peace talks to humanitarian efforts in sub-Saharan Africa. Without a clear voice at the helm, several of these conversations have reportedly stalled. A Vatican delegation intended to mediate between warring factions in Ethiopia was quietly recalled. No official reason was provided. At the United Nations, representatives of the Holy See have adopted an unusually cautious tone, issuing vague statements on moral guidance and shared dignity rather than clear positions. This subtle withdrawal is not going unnoticed. A leaked diplomatic cable from a European foreign ministry described the Vatican's current posture as inert, inaccessible, and impenetrable. The cable warned that critical alliances may drift without firm guidance from the papal office. Psalm 46 verse 6 says, "The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts, but now the voice has fallen silent, and the world listens for a sound that does not come. In its place, uncertainty grows. And in that uncertainty, movement. Perhaps most telling are the financial tremors. The Vatican Bank, formerly the Institute for the Works of Religion, manages billions in assets. While its operations are secretive by design, its influence on international banking is substantial. Since the Pope's absence, investment patterns have shifted. Assets tied to Vatican-affiliated charities and foundations have begun diversifying rapidly. A surge in offshore account activity linked to Vatican subsidiaries has been observed by economic analysts, prompting speculation of financial repositioning in anticipation of structural change. Simultaneously, Catholic charities in Italy, Spain, and Argentina have reported delays in receiving traditional Vatican subsidies. These are not just accounting irregularities, they signal a system unsure of its own leadership. Without a pope to endorse financial decisions, bureaucracies freeze or maneuver independently, without cohesion or clarity. And financial uncertainty, in turn, affects political stability, particularly in nations where the Church plays a central role in civil society. Even global intelligence communities are adjusting. Multiple European intelligence agencies have reportedly begun monitoring communications among the Vatican diplomatic corps, not for overt threats, but for patterns, sudden travel, unusual gatherings, messages sent without encryption. One official, speaking on condition of anonymity, stated bluntly, "We're treating the Vatican like an opaque regime in transition." All the signs point to internal realignment, but no one will confirm it. That makes it a wild card. The silence has also reached interreligious dialogue, where the Pope has long acted as a bridge between faiths. Meetings with the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople have been postponed. Muslim leaders who once shared joint platforms with Pope Francis have fallen conspicuously quiet. The grand imams of Cairo and Riyadh, normally vocal in their praise or critique of papal messages, have made no recent comments. Their silence mirrors Rome's, a pause that speaks volumes. In the political realm, certain world leaders are acting as if the transition has already occurred. In Italy, government officials have begun privately preparing for a papal funeral, according to leaked planning documents. In Argentina, President Francisco Salazar delivered a speech invoking Pope Francis in the past tense, a slip, perhaps, or something more. In Washington, D.C., meetings between the State Department and Vatican envoys have shifted focus from theological collaboration to logistical continuity, suggesting a quiet pivot in assumptions. What does all of this mean? It means the world is already responding to a death that has not been confirmed, to a transition that has not been declared. It means global systems, rooted in centuries of tradition and precedent, are now operating on instinct, on inference, and on rumor. And this is perhaps the most dangerous consequence of all. Because when institutions of faith cease to speak, other forces fill the gap: speculation, fear, ambition. The Vatican's silence is not just a lack of words. It is a catalyst. It disrupts alliances, stalls diplomacy, redirects economies, and fractures unity. It whispers instability into places that once leaned on the Pope for certainty. And it suggests, with each day that passes, that something massive has occurred behind those walls, something the world is already reacting to, even if it hasn't been told what it is. Guardians of one of the most secretive places on earth, the Pontifical Swiss Guard have stood as both symbol and shield of the Vatican for over 500 years. Their Renaissance-era uniforms may attract the cameras, but beneath the pageantry lies a discipline as unyielding as stone. They are trained not merely to protect the Pope, but to protect the silence that surrounds him. To safeguard not just a man, but a sacred secrecy, one that now hangs like a veil over the apostolic palace. It is within that silence that we must now look for cracks. For weeks, no one within the Vatican has issued a clear word regarding Pope Francis' condition or whereabouts. Yet those who know the internal workings of Vatican City understand that such silence does not happen naturally. It is enforced, orchestrated, controlled. Several sources, speaking under strict anonymity, have begun to suggest that communication among the inner ranks has been severely restricted. Clergy members once active on social media have fallen conspicuously silent. Staff who previously engaged with journalists or Vatican watchers now refuse to respond to even casual inquiries. One long-serving administrative aide, when contacted by a prominent European journalist, offered only this: "We are being watched more closely than usual." Everyone is being watched. Inside the walls of the Apostolic Palace, there is always tension. But this is different. It is not the quiet of reverence, nor the order of tradition. It is the stillness of fear. The Vatican is no stranger to internal discipline, but there are signs that this moment has pushed those limits further. Reports suggest that non-disclosure orders have been issued to key personnel, both clergy and laity. While the Vatican has never confirmed the existence of formal gag orders, there are mechanisms in place to suppress sensitive information, especially during moments of internal instability. One particularly disturbing account came from a custodian with access to the Apostolic Palace's lower corridors. According to this individual, all non-essential staff were temporarily relocated from certain areas of the residence in early January, just as speculation about the Pope's condition began to surface. No explanation was offered. Movement within those wings was restricted. Security presence increased. Even among the Swiss Guard, known for their unwavering loyalty and military precision, something appears to have shifted. A former member of the Guard, now living outside Italy, noted that when transitions in papal leadership are imminent, or when the Pope is gravely ill, guards are subtly reassigned. Certain exits are monitored more closely. Access points previously dormant are reactivated. And above all, communication is sealed. This, he says, is happening now. The guards themselves, of course, will not speak. They are bound by oath. But those who observe them can read the change. A recent photo taken by a visiting diplomat shows a curious detail. Guards stationed at internal checkpoints, not usually manned during routine papal activity. These are the positions activated during conclaves or moments of exceptional internal risk. Why would such a posture be assumed if everything was as normal? Psalm 64 verse 4 speaks of those who shoot suddenly and without fear, cloaked in secret intent. And behind the Vatican's ornamental facades, there are indeed arrows being loosed, but they are arrows of silence, aimed not at enemies, but at disclosure itself. There have been whispers of briefings held in the Casina Pio IV, the residence of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, far from the public's eye. While this building is normally associated with academic conferences, it has also been used for high-level consultations. One insider claimed that senior curial officials were seen entering through private entrances late at night. The content of these meetings is unknown, but their timing coincides with the Pope's last verified communications. The fear for many insiders is not just of punishment. It is of being part of something they cannot name, something unraveling in the very heart of their faith. If Pope Francis is dead or incapacitated, then every word spoken now becomes part of a legacy or a cover-up. And choosing the wrong side of that divide could mean the end of a career. Or worse, the end of trust within the only institution they have ever served. Even the Vatican press corps, once a lively mix of journalists, theologians, and global correspondents, has grown uneasy. Long-time reporters speak of decreased access, sudden policy changes regarding press credentials, and unexplained delays in responses from Vatican spokespersons. One Vatican journalist, speaking to a private religious news outlet, said, "It's like speaking into a wall. The offices are manned. Emails are received. But no one is answering anymore. This is not negligence. It is policy. A strategy of information management so tight that even the existence of silence must be managed. What happens when a fortress of truth chooses secrecy over revelation? When those tasked with spreading the gospel must instead bury the facts? The truth does not die, but it hides, and those who protect it become both guardian and prisoner. In this, the Swiss Guard are more than ceremonial figures. They are the last line, not only of defense, but of control. And through their silence, a message is sent. The Vatican will not speak. Not yet. Not until it is ready. Or perhaps not until the consequences of speaking have been fully calculated. Every papacy leaves behind more than encyclicals, sermons, or photographs. It leaves behind an imprint, a spiritual fingerprint upon the Church's history, visible not only in doctrine, but in the souls it touched, the controversies it stirred, and the boundaries it challenged. And now, with Pope Francis' fate obscured in a dense and deliberate silence, the question is no longer only whether he has died, it is whether his legacy will survive the storm surrounding that silence. From the outset, Pope Francis was a figure of disruption. The first Jesuit pope, the first from the Americas, the first to choose the name Francis, invoking the saint of humility and radical poverty. His papacy was marked by gestures that defied expectations, a refusal to live in the apostolic palace, the washing of prisoners' feet, the embrace of the marginalized, and the consistent call for a church that listens before it judges. But to many within the Church's powerful core, these gestures were more than symbolism. They were provocations. He challenged the Church to shift from rigidity to mercy. He spoke of a field hospital for the wounded, not a fortress for the perfect. He allowed discussions once deemed taboo on civil unions, remarried divorcees, the role of women in ministry, environmental ethics, economic injustice. He issued the encyclical Laudato Si, rebuking global powers for ecological destruction. He opened the doors of the church wider than they had been in generations. And not everyone inside those doors welcomed what came through. Francis was, in many ways, a pope of the people, but not always a pope of the hierarchy. Resistance came from within. Cardinals openly challenged his authority. Letters were leaked. Some bishops worked quietly to undermine his reforms. He was accused of creating confusion in doctrine, of prioritizing inclusion over clarity. Others defended him with passion, calling him a needed correction to a church long seen as aloof and punitive. He stood at the crossroads of love and law and dared to step off the well-trodden path. And now, in his absence, whether it be by death, illness, or deliberate concealment, there is a risk that the legacy of Francis is being rewritten before it can be fully recorded. The Church has mechanisms for remembrance. When a pope dies, his life is recounted in official declarations, his teachings archived, his personal effects curated for history. But this process depends on transparency. If there is no confirmation of death, no funeral rites, no public tribute, what becomes of that legacy? Already, shifts are being observed. Certain Vatican departments have begun reverting to language and practices that Francis had distanced the Church from. Terms like irregular unions, rarely used in his final years, are reappearing in internal documents. Local bishops in conservative dioceses have begun halting reforms that were once encouraged under his pontificate. In seminaries, emphasis is returning to scholasticism and rigid dogma, downplaying the pastoral flexibility Francis emphasized. It is a quiet reversal, not announced, not justified, simply enacted, as if a page is being turned before the final paragraph has been read. There is a saying in ecclesial politics: the Church buries its popes, and then it moves on. But this time, there has been no burial, no closure, no shared grief. Only an intentional fog through which legacy itself becomes vulnerable. Psalm 143 verse 4 says, "My spirit grows faint within me. My heart within me is dismayed." For those who followed Francis, this moment feels much like that verse. His papacy, for all its compassion, for all its fire, now feels as though it is being gently erased, softened by omission, buried not beneath stone, but beneath silence. Even in his final known public appearances, the Pope seemed aware of the forces aligned against him. His last few homilies carried a tone of urgency, warnings against those who resist the Spirit and hearts hardened by fear of change. Was he preparing the Church for a time when his voice would no longer echo within its halls? It is a dangerous thing to be a reformer in an institution built on tradition. And Pope Francis, though never a revolutionary in doctrine, was a radical in tone and posture. He shifted the Church's center of gravity from Rome to the periphery, from the throne to the threshold. He made those on the margins feel seen. And now, with his visibility wiped away, those very people may wonder if their place at the table was ever secure. If the Vatican does not formally honor his life and work, if it withholds the rituals that sanctify memory, then it risks more than forgetting him. It risks telling the world that the past 12 years were a detour rather than a direction. And what of the faithful? What of those who found healing in his words, courage in his example, challenge in his simplicity? What message is sent to them when the shepherd disappears and no one lights a candle? When the story ends not with mourning, but with a vanishing? Perhaps the most haunting possibility is that Pope Francis' legacy may be remembered not as a crescendo of compassion, but as a chapter torn out before it could be closed. A legacy interrupted, not by nature, but by intent. In the absence of answers, questions multiply. And when silence becomes the only language spoken by those in power, imagination begins to speak in its place. Across forums, comment sections, encrypted channels, and private conversations, a chorus of speculation has risen, not merely about the Pope's death, but about whether he is even dead at all. These theories, dismissed by some as paranoia, are for others the only way to explain a mystery that official sources refuse to confront. The theories range from plausible to the unthinkable. And yet, in a world where the Vatican has declined to utter even the most basic clarification, nothing can be dismissed out of hand. Theory 1. The Pope is dead, and it's being covered up until a successor is secure. This is perhaps the most widely accepted hypothesis among those skeptical of the Vatican's silence. It suggests that Pope Francis did, in fact, pass away, but that his death has been withheld from the public in order to avoid chaos, factionalism, or a premature power vacuum. Proponents argue that the Vatican may be buying time to ensure a successor is chosen behind the scenes, especially if the College of Cardinals is divided or if a traditional conclave would risk exposing internal fractures. This theory finds traction in the Church's history of closely managing transitions. The Vatican is no stranger to secrecy, particularly during unstable periods. But the idea of delaying the announcement of a Pope's death for weeks or months stretches the bounds of precedent. Still, it explains the meticulous silence. It suggests that the rituals have not occurred because they are being prepared in secret, or perhaps replaced altogether. Theory 2. The Pope is not dead, but he has been removed. The second theory takes a darker turn, that Pope Francis was ousted in a silent coup. According to this view, factions within the Curia, possibly aligned with more conservative or anti-globalist forces, engineered his removal due to growing discomfort with his progressive stance on social issues, interfaith dialogue, and economic justice. His papacy, while celebrated among many laity, faced entrenched resistance from within, including public dissent from high-ranking cardinals. What if that dissent reached its breaking point? The theory posits that Francis may be alive, but no longer in control, that he has been sequestered, placed in isolation, or even compelled to resign under coercion. Some suggest that the delay in announcing a new leader is not about succession, it is about negotiation, about managing the optics of an unprecedented ecclesial intervention without revealing how deeply the divide has grown within the Vatican walls. This scenario is speculative, but not without precedent. In 2013, Pope Benedict XVI resigned under murky circumstances. Though officially attributed to age and health, many have long questioned whether pressure, internal or external, played a role. Could something similar, but far more covert, be unfolding now? Theory 3. The Pope is in hiding. Voluntarily or under duress, a more fringe theory claims that Pope Francis may have gone into hiding, either in protest or in fear. Perhaps he uncovered a threat so severe, corruption, abuse, or geopolitical entanglement, that he chose to remove himself from public view to protect the Church or himself. Alternatively, some argue he may have been forced into protective seclusion following credible threats to his life. Under this theory, the Pope remains alive, but cannot return until certain internal or external dangers have been neutralized. While dramatic, this idea finds echoes in the experiences of other spiritual leaders and heads of state who have vanished temporarily for protection. The question, however, becomes why the Vatican would participate in such silence if the Pope were safe. Why not reassure the world? Why maintain such an exhaustive veil? Theory 4. A deep church has seized control. Among the most disturbing theories is the idea of a deep church, an entrenched and secretive network of clerics, financiers, and ideologues within the Vatican, who have long operated independently of the Pope's influence. Under this theory, This network has now asserted control, exploiting Francis' frailty, age, or isolation to assume unofficial leadership. This faction, possibly aligned with global elites or resistant to the reforms of Vatican II, would be working methodically to reverse the trajectory of the Church. The silence around Francis would be part of a broader reset, one that dismantles the theological, pastoral, and political shifts he introduced. To many, this sounds conspiratorial. But similar fears have been expressed, albeit in subtler tones, by prominent Catholic figures. Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigan, for example, has repeatedly spoken of secret forces undermining the faith from within. Though controversial, his warnings have given momentum to those who believe the Church is engaged in an internal battle for its soul. Theory 5. Nothing has happened, but the silence itself is the strategy of final. Quieter theory is that nothing has happened at all, that Pope Francis is alive, recovering, or simply retreating from public life due to age and health. In this view, the Vatican's silence is not evidence of conspiracy but of miscommunication, overcautious bureaucracy, or an attempt to preserve papal dignity during a decline. However, this theory struggles to explain the sheer consistency of concealment, the disappearance of live events, the lack of fresh imagery, the scripted messages, and the increasing signs of institutional activity moving forward without visible leadership. In an age when the Vatican has the means to communicate instantly, the choice to remain silent, if benign, has still caused deep and unnecessary confusion. Psalm 10 verse 1 asks, "Why, O Lord, do you stand far away? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble?" The question now, for millions, is not whether the Pope is alive or dead, but why those who know the truth refuse to share it. Each theory, regardless of how extreme, is rooted in a shared reality. No one knows what's happening. And in that void, speculation is not just inevitable, it becomes a form of resistance, a refusal to accept silence as sufficient. What was once conspiracy is now inquiry. What was once paranoia is now an appeal for transparency. And as the faithful wait for any sign, any word, any voice from behind the veil, they are left with only whispers and the chilling realization that sometimes the most disturbing truth is not what we know, but what we are not allowed to ask. In every age, the Church has endured darkness, not only the darkness of persecution or disaster, but the deeper, more disorienting darkness of uncertainty. It is a fog that creeps not through stone cathedrals, but through the corridors of the soul, settling over hearts that once burned bright with assurance. Today, millions of Catholics stand in that fog, peering toward Rome and seeing only shadows where there was once light. The silence that surrounds the fate of Pope Francis is no longer just a mystery of leadership. It has become a test of faith. And what does faith look like when the shepherd is silent? Many believers have found themselves whispering questions once thought unthinkable. Where is our Holy Father? Why won't they tell us the truth? If those in charge of the Church can fall silent, how do we know what to believe anymore? These are not questions of rebellion. They are questions of the wounded, of those who trusted deeply and have been left without answers. It is not a crisis of doctrine. It is a cry for presence, for reassurance, for clarity. Psalm 13 verse 1 speaks directly to this ache. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? This is the cry of every heart that seeks God in the silence and hears only its own echo. It is not the absence of belief, but the pain of not knowing where to place that belief when everything familiar begins to disappear. When the Pope vanishes from view, it feels like the Church itself has drawn inward, like the maternal arms of a spiritual mother have folded away. And for many, especially the poor, the marginalized, and the new believers who found hope in Francis' outreach, that disappearance cuts deep. They wonder if the warmth they once felt was an illusion, or if they have been left alone again. So what can the faithful do? They must remember that the Church is more than the Vatican, more than the Curia, more than even the papacy. It is the body of Christ, not a building, but a people. And where 2 or 3 are gathered, their Christ is among them. This truth, so easily quoted, becomes a lifeline when institutional clarity fades. Because when the structures falter, the Spirit does not. This is not the first time the Church has walked in fog. The faithful have endured schisms, anti-popes, excommunications, betrayals from within. The saints of old knew confusion well. Saint Teresa of Avila faced persecution from her own order. Saint John of the Cross was imprisoned by his fellow monks. And still they trusted. Still, they listened in the silence until the whisper of God became louder than the roar of fear. Today, believers are being called into that same sacred trust. Not a blind faith, but a brave one. Brave enough to admit uncertainty. Brave enough to mourn what feels lost. And brave enough to continue walking, even when the path ahead is hidden. Faith in the fog does not mean pretending the fog is not there. It means refusing to let it stop the journey. There are still candles to be lit, still sacraments to receive, still prayers to be whispered in the dark. Because the heart of Catholicism has never been found solely in Rome, it is found in every soul that turns toward God with trembling hands and a persistent hope. Even now, in this uncertain hour, God has not fallen silent. The gospel still speaks. The Eucharist still feeds. The Psalms still cry out and comfort. The mission of mercy and justice continues, not only from pulpits, but from hospital beds, prison cells, kitchens where hungry children are fed, and streets where the poor are still seen. If the Pope is gone, his legacy of inclusion and compassion does not vanish with him. If he is hidden, then his call to reach those on the margins becomes even more urgent. The faithful must not wait for the Vatican to confirm what they already know, that the call to love, to serve, to forgive, the call remains. Let the silence of Rome not harden hearts, but deepen them. Let it drive the faithful not into despair, but into the arms of Christ, into the Scriptures, into community, into acts of quiet resistance, resistance against apathy, fear, and the temptation to abandon the Church in its hour of opacity. This moment is not just about what the Church has failed to say. It is about what the faithful must now choose to proclaim. Faith, now more than ever, is a decision to remain rooted when everything sways, a decision to build an altar, not of marble, but of courage, to say, even if I do not know where my shepherd is, I will remain a sheep in the fold of grace. Even if the voice above falls silent, I will listen for the voice within. The fog will not last forever, but while it surrounds us, we are not called to escape it. We are called to shine within it. What began as a whisper has grown into a global question. What started as a lack of statement has become the most defining message the Vatican has sent in years. Through every chapter of this unfolding silence, through the missing rituals, the vanishing appearances, the tightened corridors of power, and the quiet shifts in global diplomacy, a singular truth has become inescapable. This is not ordinary. The silence surrounding Pope Francis is no longer just an absence, it is a force, a decision, a deliberate withholding of truth that has echoed through sanctuaries, digital landscapes, and the hearts of believers. It has stirred prophets and skeptics alike. It has shaken trust in institutions and opened wounds of uncertainty that will not close easily. But what if the silence isn't just hiding something? What if it is saying something? Perhaps it is not only a veil, it is a mirror, showing us how quickly faith becomes fragile without transparency. How easily trust crumbles when tradition is interrupted without explanation. how deeply we yearn not for spectacle, but for truth, however difficult it may be to hear. The Vatican has long mastered the art of mystery, but never before has its silence felt so vast, so intentional, and so deeply personal to so many. The world does not demand scandal, it demands clarity. Not chaos, but closure. And if that is not given, then the silence will continue to speak, and people will continue to listen to what is not said, to what is withheld, to what is obscured. We have explored every corner of the unknown, the timeline that vanished into contradiction, the rituals that never came, the corridors that narrowed with power, the messages that felt scripted, hollow, detached, the whispers from within, the prophecies that eerily align, the questions the faithful now carry. And at the center of it all, we are left with one final question, one that transcends politics, tradition, and power. Is this silence meant to protect us from the truth? Or is it preparing us for something far greater than we can yet imagine? Only time will tell. But until that time comes, we do what the faithful have always done in the darkness. We wait, we pray, and we remain watchful. If this message spoke to something deep in you, if it challenged, moved, or opened a door in your mind or spirit, please consider subscribing to this channel. There are more stories, more truths, more journeys ahead. Click like to let us know this kind of content matters. Leave a comment. We want to hear your thoughts, your questions, your reflections. And most importantly, share this video with someone close to you. A friend, a family member, someone who's asking the same questions you are. Because in times of silence, we need each other to make sense of the sound we cannot hear. And together, we may yet uncover what was never meant to remain hidden. Thank you for watching.